Crash Bandicoot has always been one of my favorite video game characters. I remember being a kid back in 2003 when my friend who had a PS2 popped in Nitro Kart. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that I was basically playing Mario Kart and there was, like, an egg? So I had the essentials. It didn't take long for me to fall in love with the ridiculous world these equally ridiculous characters inhabited. The thing that bothers me about Crash, though, is that I've really never felt like he gets the respect he deserves. If you're talking about a colorful mascot platformer in 2020, you're basically talking about Mario or Sonic. Now this could be because back in 2008 he kinda slipped into a coma, but he woke up in 2016, so what's the big deal? The disturbing conclusion I've come to fear is that when everyone picked up the Sane Trilogy, they may have immediately started Crash 1, got to the high road and quit. I'm sure plenty played beyond that, but the point is that I think a lot of people played the first game, decided it wasn't for them, and gave up. The reason this is a problem is that Crash 1 kinda... I mean, it's better than 90% of Blue Boy's catalog, but let's be honest, that's not saying much. What I'm getting at is that Crash 2 and 3 blow the first game out of the water so hard that I'd honestly say just skipping it isn't that big of a deal. This game, though? This game's the shit. After being defeated at the end of Crash 1, unless you collected all the gems, I really don't know why they did it that way, Dr. Neo Cortex falls from the sky only to find himself lucky enough to land near some powerful newly introduced crystals. Over the course of a year, he and another scientist, Dr. N. Jin, who says "Lift," build a space station that orbits above the planet known as the Cortex Vortex trademark, which requires a mere 25 more crystals to reach full power. Seeing as they're both in space now, Cortex decides that the best candidate to retrieve these crystals for him is none other than Crash himself. The Bandicoot, an absolute genius, decides to trust Cortex and help him out. So if Cortex wants Crash to retrieve the crystals, where are all these enemies coming from? The answer to that question is none other than the original scientist sidekick Dr. N. Brio, who can see through Cortex's evil plan, informing Crash that he should instead collect the gems from each location, which can be used to blast the Cortex Vortex trademark right out of the sky. And thus, he places enemies in Crash's path to prevent him from getting the crystals. It's such a simple story, and yet it's got plenty going on, and serves as such a perfect extension of the first game that it's kind of unbelievable. Of course, nobody's playing Crash for the story, and luckily Crash 2 is also the perfect game for that to be the case, as what really makes this game stand out in the trilogy is how amazingly creative and tight its level design is. The first thing to mention when talking about Crash 2's improvement is the addition of one simple action that makes all games after the first 100 times better, and that is the ability to slide. Not only does a slide give you a slight boost of speed, but it can also be combined with a jump to get even more speed and some extra distance, as well as be used to take out some certain slide-specific enemies. No joke, man, this one mechanic makes Crash so much more fun to control that Crash 1 immediately feels archaic, and I find it fascinating how this one simple thing can have such an impact. In terms of level-to-level gameplay, it's pretty much exactly what you expect from Crash, just super refined. You've got your standard levels where you platform at your own pace, you've got your levels that give me anxiety, and you've got your levels where you're running towards the camera away from certain death. Crash 2 does occasionally mix things up by putting you in a jetpack or on a motor surfboard, but it's pretty standard stuff overall. One thing you'll find spicing up the levels of this game are the new iconic Nitro boxes, which are essentially just TNT crates that kill you instantaneously, and are also the perfect segue into talking about all the new death animations, which can be just so brutally violent. I know this is like the most juvenile thing ever, but I will never not get a kick out of Crash being completely and utterly obliterated by the horrifying stuff he comes across. Speaking of dying though, you may be doing it a lot in this game. As in, I think a lot of people are gonna find it rather challenging. My opinion on this is kinda complicated, because I personally don't think getting through the game is all that difficult, but I could say the same thing about Crash 1, which was, of course, notoriously said to be more difficult than Beyblade Metal Fusion for the Nintendo DS. There is one piece of advice I can give you, though, and that is that you should never, ever, try to 100% a Crash game on your first playthrough. I actually made this mistake back when the Sane Trilogy came out. It had been so long since I played the original Crash 2 that I basically remembered none of it, and yet I tried to go for the 100%, and quit out of frustration when I got to the stupid B levels. Luckily, I did eventually feel the desire to come back and loved the rest of the game, but a lot of people are not going to give it that second chance. The optimal way to play, in my opinion, is to break boxes at a very specific time, when it seems fun. Personally, I break every box I come across just because I think it's pretty satisfying and rewarding, but if you see boxes that look like a nightmare to get, I see no shame in just leaving them and moving on. The box system though? Oh, the box system though! I honestly think the box system is legitimately one of the most ingenious things ever put in a platformer. They can be items, they can be obstacles, they can be platforms. A lot of the time you can just run right by them with no problem, but you're rewarded every single time you go out of your way to break one, and tying the 100% completion to them is so clever. Despite this cleverness, however, the box gems have the ability to turn these games from fun, slightly challenging little romps to actual physical pain in real life. Seriously, a lot of these are not for the faint of heart. Every once in a while you'll find one that goes down pretty easily, but for every one like that you have a B level where you have to get to the death route, play the death route, backtrack through the death route against the camera after hitting all the boxes, and take the normal route, getting every box along the way without dying. And then you have the really sadistic shit like Cold Hard Crash, which is coincidentally my nickname when I beat this damn thing, that has not only a massive stretch of obstacles on ice physics and a death route, but also 155 boxes. It's still not the hardest thing I've ever done, but believe me when I say getting every box in this game will take you places that you will not like. Don't blame me if you look at yourself differently after coming out of it. Calming back down for a brief moment, I mentioned ice physics in that last section, so I guess it's a good time to talk about the controls. It's actually pretty simple. The standard running and jumping controls are perfection incarnate, the polar bear and jetpack controls are doable but still occasionally a little wonky, and the ice controls... yeah, the ice controls are like terrible, regardless of which version of the game you're playing. And honestly, it's just something Crash games have never gotten right. Even in CTR Nitro Fueled, one of my favorite games of all time, they are absolute crap, but they really feel wrong here. There's this weird thing where hitting a wall while sliding keeps your momentum, which means if you jump too soon after hitting a wall, Crash will just go flying for absolutely no reason at all. Luckily, only like 3 of the levels in this game are ice levels, so it's not a super consistent pain, but if you're going for those box gems, you will hurt. The last thing left for this video is to mention an elephant that's been in the room this entire time, and that's the fact that I've only been showing footage of the Sane Trilogy version of these games. Now I know of plenty of people who prefer the originals, and I respect that opinion, no matter how wrong it may be. Don't get me wrong, I definitely still love the PS1 trilogy, but the quality of life changes brought by the remakes just make them so much better. As I alluded to earlier, the remake trilogy was the way I first completed each of these games, and going back to play the originals was a jarring experience to say the least. Color me pretty damn surprised to find myself in the originals having even more trouble with depth perception and hitboxes. Granted, nothing like this happened, but that's not saying a whole lot. One thing I can at least say is that Crash 2 held up the best out of the original versions, with Crash 3 leaving me super frustrated at points, especially with the vehicle stages. God, those things are impossible to control in the originals. I also haven't mentioned it thus far, but the insane version of Crash 2 can actually be completed 102%. This is because the developers decided to take the time relic concept from Crash 3, where you essentially speedrun a level and break time boxes for the best time possible, and crammed it into the original 2 games that weren't designed for it. I'm sure this will come as a shock, but that was not a good idea. Originally, I had a whole section of the video here where I did some funny screaming about how much I hate the time relics, but then I thought, no, it is vitally important that I articulate how much I believe time relics to be the most unbearable piece of idea ever put into a platformer. You see, they make sense in CTR. It's a racing game, so having a mode that challenges you to finish a track in a certain amount of time makes perfect sense. But it just does not work in a platformer with the types of obstacles that Crash games have. Even in Crash 3, a game that was intended to have them, they turned levels that are normally fun into complete and utter ass. And let's not even talk about how much the notoriously shitty hitboxes can ruin a run. The fact that you only need the gold relics for maximum percent could be considered forgiving game design, but I call it something else. F***ing mercy, because I would sooner tear my arms off than go for platinums on half these stages. I could wish for a million amazing new things to be in a brand new Crash platformer, but my number one request is just the absence of these pieces of shit, because I absolutely hate them. But overall, yeah, I love Crash 2. I seriously cannot recommend this game enough, especially if you're a fan of platformers, and I really hope I can bring Crash some more attention because he is sorely lacking it considering how amazing some of these games are. I couldn't really find a good spot for this in the video, so I'm just gonna drop it here. This is the announcement of a project in my life that I'm going to undertake, and probably regret, and that is to 100% at least one version of every single Crash Bandicoot game that has ever existed, going for the bonus percentages whenever I feel like it. I'm excited to play them all, and I sincerely hope I find some hidden gems, but needless to say, I am not looking forward to the massive pile of relics that lie ahead of me. Regardless of how much I kicked and screamed, I did go for the full 102% on Crash 2 NST. Alongside it, on the completion chart here, we can go ahead and throw a 100% completion for Crash 1 Insane Trilogy, and a 108 completion for Crash 3 Insane Trilogy. Yes, I must admit that even though I hate the relics, they do not by any stretch of the imagination ruin these games. In fact, I actually planned on getting 105% on my Vita version of Crash 3 before this video, but after getting half the relics, I really don't feel so good. I'm sure I'll be fine though. And so, Wade died that day. He never even got a chance to talk about the music.
Oh damn it, I forgot the music! The music's good! It's really good!